Year 2560 BC. The Giza desert scorches under a relentless sun as tens of thousands of men haul the final granite block toward the summit of an artificial mountain that defies all human logic. Khufu, the all-powerful pharaoh, gazes upon his masterpiece, a tomb so colossal it will remain the tallest structure on the planet for nearly 4,000 years. But what really matters isn't what the world can see from the outside. It's what lies hidden in the stone bowels of this giant. Because inside the Great Pyramid, in the absolute darkness of its secret passages, rests a labyrinth that has baffled thieves, explorers, and scientists for millennia. And the question we all ask is inevitable: what the hell is really in there? The answer is way stranger than you think. You won't find mountains of gold or chambers packed with glittering treasures. There are no mummies wrapped in linen waiting in golden sarcophagi. The pyramids were looted so long ago that when the first modern explorers managed to get in, they found only emptiness, silence, and unanswered questions. But that emptiness hides something infinitely more valuable than any jewel: engineering secrets that challenge our understanding, inexplicable spaces whose function we don't know, and an Egyptian obsession with death that turned tons of rock into eternity machines. Let's start from the beginning, from the moment someone first managed to enter the Great Pyramid after more than 3,000 years of airtight sealing. We're in the year 820 AD. The Abbasid Caliph Abdullah Al-Mamun, ruler of Baghdad and son of the legendary Harun al-Rashid, arrives in Giza consumed by an obsession. Arab legends whisper that inside the pyramid lie celestial maps, impossible measuring instruments, and treasures amassed by ancient pharaohs. Al-Mamun isn't just any looter. He's a cultured man, fascinated by science, and determined to uncover what the Egyptians guarded in their most enigmatic construction. But there's a monumental problem. The original entrance to the pyramid, located on the north face 17 meters above ground level, remains completely invisible. The Egyptian builders sealed and camouflaged it with such mastery that 3 millennia later, no one knows exactly where it is. Al-Mamun stands before 146 meters of solid stone without the slightest clue on where to enter. So he makes a brutal decision: if he can't find the door, he'll create his own. His men start hammering the north face with mallets, wooden wedges, and fire, trying to break through the limestone block by block. It's desperate, exhausting work that advances centimeter by centimeter over weeks. Then something extraordinary happens. As the workers dig their forced tunnel into the stone mountain, they hear a dull sound echoing nearby. Something heavy has just fallen inside the pyramid. The noise comes from a few meters east of where they're digging. Al-Mamun orders them to change the tunnel's direction, following the echo of that mysterious thud. And finally, after 30 meters of brutal excavation through the stone, his men break through a wall and emerge into a dark, narrow passage descending into the depths of the earth. They've achieved the impossible. They're inside the Great Pyramid. The sound they heard was the fall of one of the 3 granite blocks sealing the ascending passage. Something in Al-Mamun's excavation destabilized these closing stones, causing one to shift. Without that stroke of luck, they probably never would have found the internal passages. The tunnel Al-Mamun created still exists today. It's the entrance all modern tourists use, forever known as the Robber's Tunnel. But what Al-Mamun found inside wasn't treasures or stellar maps. It was something much more disconcerting, a stone labyrinth that seemed to make no sense. Let's explore that labyrinth from the start, from the original entrance the Egyptian builders designed. This true entrance is on the north face, 17 meters above the ground, perfectly aligned with true north, with a precision that still amazes modern engineers. When you enter through this original opening, you immediately face a descending corridor, barely 1 meter 20 centimeters wide and 1 meter high. You can't walk upright. You have to crouch, even crawl in some sections, as you descend a constant 26-degree slope that sinks into the bedrock beneath the pyramid. This descending passage stretches for 105 meters, cutting first through the pyramid's limestone blocks and then excavated directly into the Giza Plateau's rocky bedrock. The air here is heavy, charged, still for millennia. There's no natural ventilation. The temperature stays constant around 20 degrees Celsius year-round, no matter if the desert outside bakes at 50 degrees or winter nights drop near freezing. As you descend this claustrophobic tunnel, the rock envelops you on all sides, the ceiling just inches from your head, the walls brushing your shoulders. The darkness is absolute, so deep you can feel it like a physical presence. At the end of this endless descent, the passage levels out and continues horizontally for another 9 meters before opening into a subterranean chamber that has puzzled everyone for centuries. This room, carved into the bedrock 30 meters below the pyramid's base level, measures about 14 meters east to west and 8 meters north to south. But what's truly strange is that it seems unfinished. The floor is irregular, rough, with evident tool marks from cutting. The walls show the half-completed work of the masons. At the southern end, there's a vertical shaft that drops another 14 meters into absolute darkness, leading nowhere. Why would the Egyptians dig a chamber under the pyramid and then abandon it unfinished? Theories abound. Some Egyptologists suggest this was the first planned burial chamber, abandoned when Khufu changed his mind and decided his final resting place should be higher, inside the pyramid's body. Others propose it was a decoy chamber, designed to confuse thieves into thinking they'd found the tomb when the real treasure waited above. A third theory suggests it has symbolic meaning, representing the Egyptian underworld, the Duat, the dark realm the pharaoh had to journey through after death. What makes this chamber even more mysterious is that during the 19th century, explorers like Weiss and Perring discovered that if you tapped the walls in certain spots, the sound echoed hollowly, suggesting additional spaces behind the rock. In 1993, a team used ground-penetrating radar and confirmed that there are indeed unexplored cavities behind the walls of this subterranean chamber. To this day, no one knows what those hidden spaces contain or why they were sealed. But let's go back to the descending passage. About 28 meters from the start, right where the corridor still cuts through the pyramid's blocks before sinking into the rock, something extraordinary waits in the ceiling. An ascending passage opens upward, a 1 meter 20 centimeter wide tunnel that rises at the same 26-degree slope in the opposite direction, delving into the pyramid's heart. This is the path leading to Khufu's true secrets, but for millennia it remained completely inaccessible. The Egyptian builders sealed this ascending passage with 3 massive granite blocks, each nearly 2 meters long, fitted perfectly into the tunnel like gigantic plugs. Granite is one of the hardest stones in existence, incomparably tougher than the limestone that makes up most of the pyramid. Smashing these blocks with the tools available in antiquity would have been virtually impossible. When Al-Mamun and his men finally reached this point, after entering through their forced tunnel, they tried to break the granite blocks and failed completely. The granite shattered their tools without even cracking. So they made an ingenious decision. Instead of going through the blocks, they'd dig around them. The limestone surrounding the granite plugs was much softer, so they carved an irregular tunnel in the limestone, bypassing the granite blocks like immovable obstacles until they emerged into the ascending passage beyond the seal. This improvised detour still exists, visible to anyone touring the pyramid's interior today. An irregular scar where 9th century Arabs literally dug around the Egyptian defenses. Once past the granite blocks, the ascending passage stretches for 39 meters of exhausting climb. Again, you can only move crouched or even crawling, the low ceiling pressing down as you ascend the 26-degree slope. The walls are finely polished limestone, fitted with such precision you can't slip a sheet of paper between the blocks. The slope is constant, mathematically exact, aligned with astronomical precision. And then, after 39 meters of claustrophobic ascent, the passage suddenly widens, and you find yourself in a space that takes your breath away. The Grand Gallery. Imagine going from a narrow tunnel where you can barely move to a stone cathedral rising 8.5 meters above your head. The Grand Gallery is one of the ancient world's architectural masterpieces, a 47-meter-long corridor whose ceiling forms a perfect stepped false vault that has withstood the weight of millions of tons of stone for 4,500 years without cracking. The walls rise vertically for 2 meters and then start sloping inward in 7-stepped layers, each layer protruding slightly over the one below until they meet at the top, forming a ceiling just 1 meter wide. The exact function of the Grand Gallery remains a mystery. Its construction required astonishing technical mastery. Each of the massive limestone slabs in the ceiling is perfectly balanced, distributing weight to the side walls instead of collapsing downward. The gallery's floor has a central ramp, flanked by raised benches on both sides. On these benches are a series of 27 pairs of vertical slots carved into the stone, each pair evenly spaced along the gallery. What were these slots for? No one knows for sure. Some theories suggest they held wooden beams used during construction to slide the pharaoh's sarcophagus up to the upper chamber. Others propose they were part of a counterweight system used to seal the pyramid after burial. There are even more speculative theories that the Grand Gallery functioned as some kind of acoustic resonance chamber, designed to amplify ritual sounds during funeral ceremonies. The only certainty is that this structure represents a colossal effort that goes far beyond what's needed for a simple access corridor. At the end of the Grand Gallery, the ceiling drops abruptly, forming a low passage called the Great Step, a massive limestone block nearly 2 meters high that marks the transition to the pyramid's upper level. From here, the paths diverge. You can descend a horizontal passage leading north, or continue ascending another passage heading south. Let's explore the horizontal path first, which leads to one of the most enigmatic rooms in the entire pyramid, the so-called Queen's Chamber. The name is completely wrong, a designation given by medieval Arab explorers who assumed any pyramid must have a chamber for the pharaoh and another for his wife. But the reality is that this room probably never had anything to do with the queen. The horizontal passage leading to it measures exactly 1 meter 20 centimeters high and stretches 38 meters eastward, penetrating deep into the pyramid's heart. The walls are finely polished limestone, the floor perfectly level, creating a corridor so straight it seems designed with modern precision instruments. The Queen's Chamber measures 5 meters 70 centimeters north to south and 5 meters 20 centimeters east to west. The ceiling forms a beautiful gabled angle, with stone slabs sloping upward from both sides to meet in the center, creating a pointed vault about 6 meters high at its peak. The eastern and western walls are perfectly aligned with the cardinal points, demonstrating again the Egyptian obsession with astronomical precision. But what's strangest is what's missing in this chamber. No sarcophagus, no inscriptions, no indication it ever served as a burial place. On the eastern wall, exactly in the center, there's a deep niche carved into the stone. It measures nearly 5 meters high and recedes into the wall, forming a kind of inverted staircase with 5-stepped levels. This niche has baffled generations of explorers. Some suggest it was designed to hold a statue of the pharaoh, allowing his ka, his spiritual essence, to inhabit the pyramid forever. Others propose it had some ritual function related to the mysterious shafts we'll see in a moment. The truth is, they found this niche completely empty, its walls bare without revealing any secrets. But what's truly fascinating about the Queen's Chamber are the 2 narrow shafts emerging from the north and south walls. These tunnels, about 20 centimeters square, delve into the pyramid's solid stone, following precise trajectories upward and outward. For centuries, no one paid much attention to these shafts. They were assumed to be ventilation systems, designed to allow air to circulate into the chamber. But in 1872, a British engineer named Dixon made a discovery that changed everything. Dixon noticed that the Queen's Chamber walls sounded hollow in certain spots. By tapping the stone with a hammer, he identified where the shafts began behind the walls. What's extraordinary is that these tunnels didn't open directly into the chamber. They were sealed, hidden behind stone slabs perfectly fitted into the walls. Dixon drilled through these sealing slabs and revealed the shaft's existence. The immediate question is obvious. Why build ventilation systems and then seal them? If they can't allow airflow, what the hell are they for? The answer might lie in Egyptian religion. Funerary texts speak of channels through which the pharaoh's soul had to travel to reach the stars, to join the gods in the sky. Modern studies have shown that these shafts are aligned with extraordinary precision toward specific constellations as they appeared in the night sky around 2500 BC. The northern shaft points toward Alpha Draconis, the pole star of that era, while the southern one aims at Orion's belt stars, identified with Osiris, the god of resurrection. They're not ventilation systems, they're stellar paths, spiritual highways built in stone, so Khufu's immortal soul could ascend from his tomb to the firmament. This understanding completely transformed our interpretation of the pyramid. It's not just a monument or a tomb, it's a religious machine, a spiritual device designed to launch the pharaoh's soul into eternity. In 1993, a German engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a small robot called Upuaut Wakon, meaning opener of ways in ancient Egyptian, to explore the southern shaft of the Queen's chamber. The robot, equipped with cameras and lights, advanced through the narrow tunnel for 65 meters, ascending through the solid stone while transmitting live images. And then, at the shaft's end, the robot encountered something completely unexpected. A small limestone slab blocking the passage entirely. But what was truly extraordinary were two copper pieces embedded in this stone door, protruding into the tunnel like handles or hooks. The discovery caused a worldwide sensation. What was behind that door? Did it lead to a secret chamber sealed since antiquity? Speculations exploded. Hidden treasures, lost texts, pyramid builders' secrets. But it wasn't until 2002 that technology allowed further investigation. An improved robot called Pyramid Rover drilled a tiny hole through the stone slab and inserted a fiber optic camera. The images showed a small empty space behind the door, just a few centimeters deep, and then another stone slab sealing the way. The disappointment was huge, but the mystery deepened. Why build a 65-meter shaft, seal it with a door equipped with copper pieces, only for that door to lead to another seal? In 2011, another robot named Djedi, after the magician from the Westcar papyrus texts, explored both Queen's chamber shafts with even more advanced technology. The images revealed that the copper pieces aren't simple rods. They're bent at the ends, forming closed loops, like genuine handles. The walls of the space between the two doors have red marks painted on them, rudimentary hieroglyphs whose meaning no one has deciphered. To this day, no one knows what's beyond those double doors or why they were built. The northern shaft of the Queen's chamber also ends in a similar sealing slab. They're enigmas within an enigma, secrets carefully constructed and sealed 4,500 years ago, waiting for technology to advance enough to reveal their purpose one day. But let's continue our tour, back to the Grand Gallery and follow the other path, the one ascending from the Great Step toward the culmination of this whole labyrinth, the King's Chamber. This final passage is completely different from everything else in the pyramid. The ceiling is barely a meter high, forcing you to crawl almost on your knees, but the walls are built entirely of red granite blocks, not limestone. The granite was transported from Aswan quarries, over 800 kilometers south of Giza, floated down the Nile on specially built barges. It's an incredibly hard material, difficult to cut, impossible to drill with the bronze tools the Egyptians had. The granite passage extends for 8.5 meters, ascending slightly, until it opens into a small antechamber. Here we find another baffling feature. 3 granite portcullises that could slide vertically from the ceiling to seal the entrance to the final chamber. Only the first of these portcullises remains partially lowered, stuck halfway as if the mechanism jammed millennia ago. The other 2 are fully raised. From this antechamber, a short final passage leads south, and you finally emerge into the absolute heart of the Great Pyramid, the King's Chamber. This room is the reason for the entire structure, the final destination of 2,300,000 stone blocks stacked with millimeter precision. It measures 10.5 meters east to west, 5 meters 20 centimeters north to south, and 5 meters 80 centimeters high. Every surface, every wall, the floor, and the ceiling is built with massive polished red granite blocks from Aswan. The room contains about 100 granite blocks, some weighing over 50 tons. Transporting these colossal masses from Aswan, hauling them up the Nile, dragging them to Giza, and then hoisting them to 43 meters high inside the pyramid represents an engineering feat that defies all logic. The King's Chamber ceiling is formed by 9 enormous granite slabs, each about 6 meters long and weighing around 45 tons. These beams span from one side of the chamber to the other, forming a perfectly level, flat ceiling. Above your head, right now as you're in the chamber, there are 2 million tons of stone. The pressure is so immense it should have crushed this space millennia ago, reducing the granite to dust. But here we are, 4,500 years later, and the ceiling slabs show not the slightest crack. How is this possible? The answer lies directly above the granite ceiling in one of antiquity's most ingenious designs, the relieving chambers. These are 5 empty spaces stacked atop the King's Chamber, each separated by massive granite slabs. The first relieving chamber is about 1 meter high and matches the King's Chamber in floor plan. The second, third, and fourth chambers are similar, but the fifth, the top one, has a gabled roof formed by enormous limestone blocks leaning against each other to form a triangular vault. This system of relieving chambers distributes the pyramid's colossal weight sideways, directing the pressure toward the massive outer stone walls instead of allowing it to crush downward. It's a structural engineering principle so advanced we don't see it again in architecture for thousands of years. Khufu's builders perfectly understood load distribution mechanics and applied this knowledge to protect the pharaoh's burial chamber from the literally crushing weight of the mountain they were building over it. These relieving chambers remained completely hidden until 1837, when British Colonel Howard Vyse used gunpowder to blast a hole in the Grand Gallery's upper wall and discovered the first chamber. He then found ventilation shafts leading from one chamber to another, and climbing these shafts with ropes and lanterns, Vyse explored all the upper chambers. On the walls of these secret rooms, he found something that exists nowhere else in the Great Pyramid: hieroglyphic inscriptions. These marks aren't ceremonial or religious texts. They're workers' graffiti, red paint hastily applied to the stone to identify blocks during construction. Names of mason gangs, dates, quarry marks, and among these inscriptions, the pharaoh's name appears several times. Khufu, which is how the Egyptians called the one the Greeks named Cheops. These marks are direct evidence, impossible to fake, that the Great Pyramid was built during Khufu's reign around 2560 BC. They completely dismantle theories that the pyramids were built by lost civilizations or extraterrestrial visitors. It was Egyptians, flesh and blood workers, who raised them. But back to the King's Chamber. At the western end of this red granite room, against the wall, rests an object that has fascinated explorers for centuries: a rectangular red granite sarcophagus, lidless, inscriptionless, completely empty. It measures 2 meters 27 centimeters long, 98 centimeters wide, and 1 meter 5 centimeters high. The sarcophagus walls are 15 centimeters thick, and its interior is polished with a precision that requires extremely advanced tools. When the first explorers examined it with modern measuring instruments, they discovered that the interior walls are perfectly parallel with a tolerance of less than a millimeter. The interior corners are carved at exact 90-degree angles. The bottom is perfectly flat and level. Achieving this precision in granite using the bronze and stone tools available in 2500 BC should be impossible. Granite is one of the hardest stones, rated 7 on the Mohs scale. Cutting and polishing it requires tools harder than the granite itself. The Egyptians used quartz sand, which matches granite's hardness, as an abrasive. They mixed the sand with water and used it with copper saws and tubular drills to slowly cut through the stone. It's an incredibly slow and laborious process. Fully cutting a granite block could take months of continuous work. And yet, here is this sarcophagus, mute evidence of a patience and dedication that our modern civilization, accustomed to speed and mechanical efficiency, can barely comprehend. The sarcophagus is empty, but that doesn't mean it always was. When Al-Mamun and his men entered the king's chamber in the 9th century, they found the sarcophagus already open, already empty. The lid had vanished. There were no signs of Khufu's mummy or the treasures that must have accompanied it. Thieves had gotten there first, probably during Egypt's first intermediate period between 2181 and 2055 BC, when central power collapsed and royal tombs were systematically looted to fund civil wars. It's one of archaeology's great bitter pills. After 4,500 years, after surviving intact for millennia, the Great Pyramid was violated just a few centuries after its construction. What that sarcophagus contained, the treasures surrounding the pharaoh, the ritual objects and riches amassed for his journey to the afterlife, all was stolen and melted down so long ago that not a fragment remains. Khufu's mummy, if it was ever here, was probably stripped of its wrappings in search of amulets and jewels, then discarded or destroyed. But the king's chamber holds other secrets. Like the queen's chamber, it has 2 narrow shafts emerging from the north and south walls, ascending through the solid stone to the pyramid's exterior. Unlike the queen's chamber shafts, these aren't sealed. They open directly into the chamber and continue uninterrupted until they reach the pyramid's outer faces, piercing over 60 meters of solid stone. For years, they were assumed to be ventilation systems, designed to allow air to circulate into the chamber during funeral rituals. But modern studies have shown that, like the Queen's chamber shafts, they're aligned with astronomical precision toward specific constellations. The southern shaft points toward Orion's belt, identified with Osiris. The northern shaft aims at the circumpolar stars, the stars that never set below the Egyptian horizon, considered immortal and imperishable. The religious function of these shafts is clear. They're paths for the pharaoh's soul. The pyramid texts inscribed in later pyramids repeatedly speak of the pharaoh's ascension to the stars, his transformation into a god joining the imperishable northern stars and Osiris in Orion. The shafts aren't metaphors or abstract symbols. They're the physical manifestation of this belief, stone tunnels literally connecting the pharaoh's tomb to the cosmos. But here's another fascinating question. Why does the king's chamber have shafts that fully pierce the pyramid while the queen's chamber ones are sealed? If the queen's chamber was never used as a burial place, why build astronomical shafts to it? One theory proposes that originally the queen's chamber was intended as the true burial chamber, but midway through construction, Khufu changed the plans and ordered the king's chamber built higher up. The queen's chamber shafts were left sealed and unfinished when the project shifted. Another more speculative theory suggests both chambers were designed for use, but with different purposes. The king's chamber would house the pharaoh's physical body, while the queen's chamber might have been meant to hold his Ka statue, the representation of his spiritual soul. The shafts in both chambers would allow both body and Ka to ascend to the stars. It's a beautiful idea, though impossible to verify with the available evidence. What we can say for certain is that every element of the Great Pyramid, every passage, every chamber, every shaft, was designed with absolute intentionality. Nothing is accidental, nothing is decorative, Everything serves a purpose that intertwines monumental engineering with cosmic religion. The pyramid is simultaneously a tomb, a temple, a spiritual machine, and a statement of absolute power. It's the pharaoh proclaiming his divine nature, his immortality, his right to rule as intermediary between heaven and earth. Building this structure required unimaginable resources. Modern calculations estimate it took about 20 to 30,000 workers over 20 years to complete the Great Pyramid. They weren't slaves, as was mistakenly believed for centuries, but paid workers, fed and housed by the state. Archaeologists have excavated worker settlements near Giza, where they found evidence of massive bakeries, breweries, and slaughterhouses capable of feeding thousands daily. These workers weren't just building a monument. They were participating in a religious project of cosmic importance. Working on the pharaoh's tomb guaranteed divine blessings, ensured that when the pharaoh ascended to the stars, he'd remember those who helped him, intercede for them before the gods. It was an honor, a sacred duty that transformed exhausting labor into a religious act. The limestone blocks forming the pyramid's core were quarried locally on the Giza plateau. The red granite blocks for the inner chambers traveled 800 kilometers from Aswan. The fine white limestone for the outer casing came from Tura quarries across the Nile, coordinating the extraction, transport, and placement of 2,300,000 blocks, each averaging 2.5 tons, represents a logistical triumph that rivals any modern construction project. How exactly they moved and lifted these blocks remains a hotly debated topic. The most accepted theory proposes a system of ramps built around the pyramid as it grew, allowing workers to drag blocks upward using wooden sleds, ropes, and brute force. Wet sand under the sleds would reduce friction, making the movement easier. But building ramps long and strong enough to reach the final height of 146 meters would require as much material as the pyramid itself. Alternative theories suggest internal spiral ramps within the structure, or lever and counterweight systems using the Grand Gallery as a lifting mechanism. Some engineers propose hydraulic techniques, flooding internal channels to float the heaviest blocks. The truth is, we don't know for sure. The Egyptians left no construction manuals. Their technical knowledge was passed orally from master to apprentice, and it was lost when pyramid building ceased after the Middle Kingdom. What we do know is that the construction's precision defies any simple explanation. The Great Pyramid's base is a nearly perfect square with sides of about 230 meters. The difference between the longest and shortest side is barely 3 centimeters, a 0.01% error. The sides are aligned with the cardinal points with 1/15 of a degree precision. The face angle is exactly 51 degrees 52 minutes, maintained constant throughout the entire height. Achieving this precision on a monumental scale, using stone, wood, and copper tools, requires deep knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and surveying. The pyramid builders were top-tier mathematicians, astronomers, and engineers, holders of a body of technical knowledge accumulated over generations. The Great Pyramid didn't emerge from nothing. It was the culmination of decades of experimentation and development. Earlier pyramids clearly show this evolution. The Step Pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, built about 80 years before Khufu's, was the first attempt at large-scale stone construction. Its stepped design reflects the era's technical limitations. Sneferu's bent pyramid, Khufu's father, shows a dramatic attempt at smooth sides, but the builders made catastrophic mistakes. The initial 54-degree angle was too steep, and midway through, they had to reduce it to 43 degrees to avoid collapse, creating the distinctive bent shape. Sneferu's next pyramid, the Red Pyramid, finally achieved the true pyramid form with smooth sides and constant angle. Khufu inherited this accumulated knowledge and perfected it, creating a structure so precisely designed and built that it remains a challenge for modern engineering. But let's return to the interior, because there's one last mystery we must explore before concluding this first part. the most recent and perhaps most baffling discovery of all. In 2017, an international team of scientists using a technique called muon tomography made an announcement that shook the world of Egyptology. They'd discovered a previously unknown void inside the Great Pyramid, an enormous empty space located directly above the Grand Gallery. Muon tomography uses subatomic particles called muons, constantly produced when cosmic rays from space hit Earth's atmosphere. These muons rain down on Earth continuously, easily passing through light materials like air, but being absorbed or deflected by dense materials like stone. By placing muon detectors in different locations inside and around the pyramid, scientists can map the structure's internal densities, revealing where there's solid stone and where there are voids. The muon data unequivocally showed the existence of a significant void, which the researchers called the Great Void, or Scan Pyramid's Big Void. This space is about 30 meters long and located 40 meters above the pyramid's base, directly over the Grand Gallery. Its exact shape and full dimensions remain uncertain because muon tomography doesn't provide detailed images like a photograph, but rather density maps. It could be a long horizontal space like a corridor or a wider chamber, or even several smaller aligned spaces. The announcement sparked frenzied speculations. Is it a secret chamber containing unlooted treasures? Is it another weight-relieving space like the chambers above the king's chamber? Could it hold texts or artifacts that revolutionize our understanding of ancient Egypt? Egyptian authorities reacted cautiously, noting that more studies are needed before considering any excavation. And they're right to be cautious. The Great Pyramid is an irreplaceable World Heritage Site. Drilling holes to explore the Great Void could cause irreversible structural damage. Plus, there's a very real possibility that the space is simply another relieving chamber, a functional void designed for weight distribution, with no contents inside. Opening the pyramid only to find an empty space would be a colossal disappointment and unnecessary harm. But the Great Void's existence reminds us of something fundamental. After 4,500 years of exploration, after centuries of studies, measurements, and excavations, the Great Pyramid still holds secrets. There are still unexplored spaces inside this stone mountain. There are still unanswered questions about how it was built, why certain elements were designed in specific ways, what exact symbolism its dimensions and proportions represent. This is the eternal fascination of the pyramids. They're simultaneously open books and closed enigmas. We can walk their passages, touch their granite walls, measure every inch of their geometry, but at the same time, they remain fundamentally mysterious, mute testaments to a civilization that viewed the world in profoundly different ways from ours. For the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't an end, but a transformation. The physical body was just one component of the complete being, which included the Kai, the life force, the Ba, the mobile personality able to travel between worlds, the Ak, the glorified spirit, the name, the shadow, the heart. Preserving all these elements and allowing the pharaoh to successfully transition to immortality required complex rituals, specific texts, and architectural structures that functioned as spiritual machines. The Great Pyramid, with its star-aligned passages, its chambers hidden in imperishable stone, its ceiling systems designed to keep the tomb intact for eternity, was precisely one of these machines. It wasn't just a place to deposit a corpse, it was a divine transformation engine, a physical ladder to heaven, a mechanism to launch the king's soul from earth to the gods. Understanding this helps us grasp why the Egyptians invested such monumental resources in these structures. For them, the pharaoh wasn't merely a political ruler, he was the living embodiment of Horus, the god's son, the guarantor of cosmic order against chaos forces. When the pharaoh died and ascended to join the gods, he maintained that protective role from the afterlife, interceding for Egypt, ensuring the Nile's annual flood, guaranteeing victory over enemies. Building his tomb wasn't vanity, It was national survival. A pharaoh successfully transformed into a god was a pharaoh who would continue protecting Egypt for all eternity. The pyramid, then, was an investment in the kingdom's eternal security, a project worth any cost in labor, materials, and time. This religious perspective explains features that otherwise seem incomprehensible. It explains why they sealed the queen's chamber shafts. They didn't need ventilation because the chamber would never receive living visitors, only the pharaoh's soul that could pass through stone. It explains why the sarcophagus is slightly wider than the king's chamber entrance passage. It was placed in the chamber during construction, before the ceilings were installed, ensuring it could never be removed, that it would remain there forever. It explains why the subterranean chamber was left unfinished. Perhaps it served its symbolic purpose, representing the duat, the underworld, without needing physical completion. It explains the relieving chambers. Protecting the king's chamber from collapse wasn't routine engineering. It was ensuring the pharaoh's body remained intact eternally, because a destroyed body meant the second death, the soul's final annihilation. Every design decision, every construction detail was infused with religious meaning and spiritual purpose. The builders weren't just stacking stones, they were building eternity in tangible form. And now, 4.5 millennia later, as you stand in the king's chamber surrounded by red granite, with the weight of 2 million tons of stone over your head, you can feel that purpose. The silence is so profound you can hear your own heartbeat. The air is still, without drafts, the temperature constant as it's been for 45 centuries. There are no decorations, no hieroglyphic texts on the walls, no bright colors. Just stone. Hard, imperishable, eternal. This bareness is deliberate. Unlike later tombs in the Valley of the Kings, covered in vibrant paintings and Book of the Dead scenes, the Great Pyramid speaks through its pure structure. Its message isn't written in words, but inscribed in geometry, in astronomical alignment, in the absolute permanence of stone. It's a message that transcends language, speaking directly to the soul about concepts of eternity, divinity, and humanity's power to conquer death itself through monumental works. When you finally exit the pyramid, crawling back through the narrow passages, ascending from the depths toward daylight, you emerge transformed. You've walked spaces that have remained almost unchanged since before alphabetic writing existed, before Rome was founded, before Buddha, Christ, or Muhammad were born. You've breathed air in chambers where human history runs so deep it defies comprehension. And yet, these spaces you've just explored represent only the beginning of the mystery. Khufu's Great Pyramid is the most famous, the largest, the most perfect. But it's not the only one. The Giza Plateau holds 2 more pyramids, each with its own secrets, its own designs, its own stories of construction and looting. And beyond Giza, the Egyptian desert is dotted with dozens of additional pyramids, each generation of pharaohs trying to emulate or surpass their predecessors' glories. We'll explore these other structures in the next section, along with the most recent discoveries revolutionizing our understanding of how they were built. We'll see what modern technologies are revealing secrets hidden for millennia. We'll debunk popular myths about hidden treasures, deadly traps, and pharaonic curses. And finally, we'll understand what the pyramids really contain. What's inside these stone mountains that have captivated human imagination for thousands of years? Because the truth is, the pyramids don't hold gold or jewels. They don't contain lost wisdom from Atlantean civilizations. They're not messages from extraterrestrial visitors or ancient electric batteries. What they contain is something infinitely more valuable. Direct evidence of humanity's capacity to imagine the impossible and then build it. They're testaments to a civilization that stared death in the face and responded by building eternity with their own hands. That's the true wonder waiting inside the pyramids. It's not material, you can't touch or weigh it, but it's there, as real as the stone itself, proof that humans, when united by a shared vision and driven by deep beliefs, can literally move mountains. Year 2520 BC. Khafre, son of Khufu, watches from the Giza plateau as his father's pyramid dominates the horizon like a colossus defying the gods themselves. Ambition burns in his chest. He can't build a bigger pyramid, that would be impossible, but he can do something equally bold. He can match his father's work and add his own touch of genius. He orders his pyramid erected next to Khufu's, using higher ground so that, seen from afar, it appears even taller, and in front of it, he'll carve directly into the bedrock something no previous pharaoh dared imagine: a colossal sphinx with his own face gazing eternally eastward toward the rising sun. Khafre's pyramid rises to 143 meters, just 3 meters shorter than his father's. But what it sacrifices in height, it compensates with visual cunning. By building it on higher ground on the plateau, he makes its peak reach practically the same altitude as the Great Pyramid summit. From certain angles, especially from the north, Khafre's pyramid seems to dominate the landscape, tricking the eye with its strategic positioning. It's a masterful perspective trick, a statement that Khafre was as powerful, as divine as his legendary father. But when we penetrate Khafre's pyramid interior, we find something radically different from Khufu's labyrinthine complexity. Here there's no grand gallery, no multiple mysterious chambers, no astronomical shaft systems pointing to the stars. The internal structure is notably simpler, more direct, almost brutally functional. And this tells us something fascinating. Each pharaoh adapted his pyramid's design according to his own beliefs, his own resources, his own interpretation of what was needed to achieve immortality. Khafre's pyramid has 2 separate entrances, both on the north face but at different heights. The upper entrance is about 12 meters above ground level, while the lower one is practically at base level. This redundancy isn't accidental. It represents an evolution in thinking about tomb protection. If thieves discovered one entrance, they might overlook the second. If one passage collapsed under the stone's weight, the other would remain accessible. It's defensive architecture applied on a monumental scale. The descending passage from the upper entrance penetrates through the pyramid's masonry on a constant slope, then continues carved into the plateau's bedrock, descending into the depths. After about 100 meters of claustrophobic descent, the corridor levels out and continues horizontally for another 20 meters before meeting the passage from the lower entrance. This Y-shaped design, where 2 separate passages converge into one, was an innovation meant to confuse looters. Where the 2 passages meet, there's an extraordinary feature: a granite portcullis, a massive door designed to seal access to the inner chambers. Unlike Khufu's granite blocks that simply blocked the passage, this portcullis could slide vertically downward from a slot in the ceiling, like a stone guillotine. The builders planned to lower it after the pharaoh's burial, permanently sealing the tomb. But when modern explorers arrived, they found the portcullis raised, stuck halfway, silent evidence that thieves had forced it millennia ago. Beyond the portcullis, a short horizontal passage leads to an antechamber carved directly into the bedrock. This rectangular room served as a transition space, the threshold between the outer world and the sanctum sanctorum where the divine pharaoh's body would rest. From here, another passage ascends slightly southward, finally penetrating into the burial chamber. Khafre's burial chamber is an impressive hall excavated in the plateau bedrock and reinforced with a false vaulted ceiling formed by enormous sloping limestone slabs. It measures 14 meters east to west and 5 meters north to south, with a ceiling rising in an inverted V. This gabled roof design distributes weight similarly to the relieving chambers above Khufu's king's chamber, but achieved more simply and elegantly. Against the western wall of this chamber rests a polished granite sarcophagus, beautifully crafted but completely empty. When Italian explorer Giovanni Battista Belzoni forced entry into this chamber in March 1818, he found the sarcophagus partially buried in debris but still in place. The lid was broken, displaced, and the interior completely empty. There was no trace of mummy, jewels, or funeral objects that must have accompanied Khafre on his journey to eternity. Belzoni, however, made a discovery that filled him with satisfaction. On one of the chamber walls, almost invisible in the shadows, he found an Arabic inscription saying, "Opened by Master Mohammed Ahmed, Mason," followed by a date corresponding roughly to the year 1200 AD. This inscription proved that medieval thieves had gotten there first, probably during Muslim dynasties when pyramid knowledge still circulated among builders and looters. Belzoni wasn't the first, just the first modern European. But what was most frustrating for Belzoni and all later explorers was the total absence of hieroglyphic inscriptions on the walls. Unlike later Valley of the King's tombs, where every surface is covered in religious texts and Book of the Dead scenes, Khafra's chamber is absolutely bare. Smooth stone walls, an empty sarcophagus. Absolute silence. The pyramid guarded its secrets through muteness, refusing to explain its purpose or the fate of its royal occupant. Yet, when you examine Khafra's pyramid from the outside, you find something that makes it unique among all Egyptian pyramids. It still retains part of its original white limestone casing at the apex. When the pyramids were built, they were completely covered in fine Tura limestone blocks, polished to shine like mirrors under the desert sun. This casing transformed the pyramids into resplendent mountains of white light, visible from kilometers away, reflecting the sun with blinding intensity. Over the centuries, especially after a devastating earthquake hit the region in 1303 AD, the limestone casing was systematically looted. The polished blocks were stripped and used to build mosques, palaces, and buildings in Cairo. The Great Pyramid lost its casing entirely, reduced to the stepped structure we see today. But Khafra's pyramid, for reasons not entirely clear, preserved part of its upper layer intact. These remaining casing blocks at the apex let us imagine how all the pyramids looked in their original glory. The surface is perfectly smooth, polished, sloped with mathematical precision. Under the desert's intense light, these blocks glow with a ghostly radiance that must have been absolutely awe-inspiring when the whole structure was covered. The pyramids weren't the rough stone mountains we know today. They were brilliant beacons of geometric perfection, visual statements of divine power dominating the landscape like fallen stars on Earth. We now move to the third and final of Giza's great pyramids, Menkaura's pyramid, grandson of Khufu and son of Khafra. At barely 65 meters high, it's significantly smaller than its predecessors' structures. Some historians interpret this as evidence of declining pharaonic power, a weakened economy unable to sustain earlier generations' monumental projects. Others suggest it represents a philosophical shift, an evolution in religious understanding that valued quality over quantity, refinement over brute scale. Because although Menkaur's pyramid is smaller, it's built with an opulence the others can't match. The lower 16 courses aren't made of ordinary limestone. They're clad in red Aswan granite, the most expensive and hardest to work material available in ancient Egypt. Transporting this granite from 800 kilometers south, polishing it to perfectly smooth surfaces, and fitting it with millimeter precision represents a resource expenditure that, proportionally, might have surpassed the larger pyramids. Menkaur's pyramid interior follows a relatively simple design, but with touches of extraordinary luxury. A descending passage penetrates from the north face, sinking into the rock beneath the pyramid. Unlike Khufu and Khafra's chambers, which are excavated in bedrock or built within the masonry, Menkaura's burial chamber is fully lined with polished granite panels, covering the walls like a protective sheathing. This granite lining turns the chamber into a space of austere beauty. The dark red granite absorbs light rather than reflecting it, creating an atmosphere of profound solemnity. Each panel was cut with astonishing precision, fitting its neighbors so perfectly that the joints are practically invisible. Cutting, transporting, and installing these panels required extraordinary technical mastery, transforming the burial chamber into an engineering jewel within the stone mountain. In the center of this chamber rested one of ancient Egypt's most beautiful sarcophagi, a rectangular black basalt chest carved with a palace facade design. Basalt is even harder than granite, an extremely fine-grained volcanic stone that allows intricate carvings. Menkar's sarcophagus was decorated with rectangular relief panels mimicking a royal palace's doors and windows, transforming the mummy container into a miniature eternal residence. When Colonel Howard Vyse explored the pyramid in 1837, he found the sarcophagus still in place, though the lid was broken and the interior emptied by ancient thieves. He also discovered fragments of a wooden anthropomorphic coffin and scattered human bone remains in the chamber. Vyse, convinced he'd found physical evidence of Menkaure himself, decided to send the basalt sarcophagus and wooden coffin to England for display in the British Museum. The sarcophagus was loaded aboard the merchant ship Beatrice, which sailed from Alexandria in October 1838. The wooden coffin was sent on a different ship and arrived successfully in London, where carbon-14 analysis later revealed it dated to the Saite period, about 2,000 years after Menkaure's reign. The bone remains turned out to be Roman era. Both were later intrusions, secondary burials placed in the pyramid centuries after its original construction. But the basalt sarcophagus never reached England. The Beatrice sailed into the Mediterranean and vanished. It's believed to have sunk somewhere near Spain's coasts during a storm, taking one of the Old Kingdom's most beautiful artifacts to the sea bottom. To this day, despite several attempts to locate the wreck, Menkaure's sarcophagus remains lost in the Mediterranean depths, a treasure that survived 4,500 years in the desert, only to be lost on the final leg of its journey to the modern world. This story of the lost sarcophagus perfectly illustrates the pyramid's greatest tragedy. Everything they contained of artistic, historical, or material value was destroyed, looted, or lost so long ago that barely fragments remain. The pyramids we explore today are empty shells, architectural skeletons stripped of everything that gave them immediate cultural meaning. It's like visiting a magnificent but completely empty cathedral. You can appreciate the architecture, but the spiritual purpose, the rituals, the sacred objects that animated it are gone. Now let's step back in time, exploring the pyramids that preceded Giza's, because the evolution of these structures tells a fascinating story of experimentation, failure, and eventual technical triumph. The first true pyramid ever built wasn't at Giza, but at Saqqara, about 16 kilometers south, during Pharaoh Djoser's reign around 2630 BC. Djoser's step pyramid is a monster of architectural innovation. Before Djoser, pharaohs were buried in mastabas, rectangular mud brick structures with sloping sides and flat roofs. They were essentially artificial mounds elevating the tomb above the desert level, protecting it from shifting sand and marking the king's resting place. But Djoser and his genius architect Imhotep conceived something radically different, stacking 6 progressively smaller mastabas one atop another, creating a giant staircase ascending 60 meters toward the sky. This wasn't just an aesthetic choice. Egyptian religious texts speak of a celestial staircase the pharaoh must climb to reach the god's realm. The step pyramid is the literal manifestation of this belief, a physical staircase built in stone, allowing the pharaoh's soul to climb from earth to the stars. Its theology transformed into architecture, metaphysics made tangible. But what's truly extraordinary about the step pyramid isn't what you see above ground, but what's hidden below. Beneath the structure, and extending in all directions, is a subterranean labyrinth of tunnels, shafts, and chambers, constituting one of the most elaborate funerary complexes ever built. There are over 5.5 kilometers of passages excavated in the rock, descending up to 28 meters underground. This underground world includes the pharaoh's burial chamber, lined with granite, but also storage rooms for funeral provisions, workshops for rituals, deep shafts holding thousands of stone vessels, and a series of rooms decorated with turquoise blue faience tiles mimicking reed mats, recreating an entire palace underground for the pharaoh to inhabit in eternity. The tunnels are narrow, some so tight you can barely pass if you turn sideways. Exploring them today with modern flashlights, is a claustrophobic and disorienting experience. The limestone walls are marked by ancient masons' tools, the ceilings low, the air stale. It's easy to get lost in this maze, where every passage looks identical to the last, where the darkness is so complete your light barely penetrates a few meters. The complexity of this subterranean system suggests the builders were experimenting, testing ideas, figuring out what worked and what didn't. Some passages were dug and then abandoned unfinished. Others lead to never-used chambers. It's exploratory architecture, humanity's first attempt at stone building on this scale, and the mistakes and plan changes are written directly into the rock. Fast forward about 60 years to Pharaoh Sneferu's reign around 2600 BC. Sneferu is the most prolific pyramid builder in all Egyptian history, responsible for 3 massive pyramids representing more total stone mass than the Great Pyramid itself. And each of these structures tells a story of outsized ambition and painful learning. The first is the Meidum Pyramid, located about 70 kilometers south of Saqqara. Sneferu started it as a 7-level step pyramid, following Djoser's design. But midway through construction, he made a bold decision. Fill in the steps with additional blocks to create smooth surfaces, transforming it into a true pyramid with sloping sides. It was a revolutionary architectural experiment, the first attempt at the classic pyramidal form. And it was a catastrophic failure. The original pyramid core was built with blocks placed sloping inward, a technique inherited from mastabas that worked well for low structures, but created instability in tall ones. When they added the smooth outer casing, the extra weight exceeded the internal structure's load capacity. At some point, probably during construction or shortly after, the outer casing collapsed catastrophically, sliding down and piling around the base like a skirt of debris. Today, the Meidum Pyramid stands as a strange monolith in the desert, a 3-level tower emerging from a massive mound of fallen blocks. Locals call it El Haram El Kadab, the false pyramid, because it looks violently destroyed. The collapse must have been a monumental shock to Sneferu and his architects, a brutal reminder that defying gravity on this scale required understanding engineering principles they were still discovering. Undaunted, Sneferu ordered a second pyramid at Dasha, about 40 kilometers north of Meidum. This time, the architects adopted a steeper 54-degree angle, determined to create a true pyramid more impressive than anything built before. But again, they encountered devastating problems. Midway through construction, with the pyramid already rising over 40 meters, cracks appeared in the internal passages and lower chambers. The angle was too steep. The upper stone's weight was crushing the internal structure. The architects faced an impossible choice: continue with the original angle and risk total collapse, or admit the error and radically modify the design. They chose the latter. From about halfway up, they abruptly changed the slope to a much gentler 43 degrees. This sudden transition from one angle to another creates the distinctive shape that gives it its name: the bent pyramid, or rhomboidal pyramid. Seen from afar, it looks like 2 different pyramids squished together, the smaller, less steep upper half pressed onto the larger lower half. But the bent pyramid's interior is absolutely fascinating because it shows bold architectural experimentation. It has 2 separate entrances, one on the north face as traditional, and another completely unexpected on the west face. Each entrance leads to its own burial chamber, effectively creating 2 tombs within one pyramid. The northern chamber has a spectacular false vaulted ceiling rising 14 meters, formed by rows of stone projecting progressively inward until meeting at the peak. This corbelled vault construction technique became the hallmark of Egyptian pyramid architecture. Unlike a true arch that distributes weight laterally, a corbelled vault simply stacks horizontal stones with each row overhanging the one below slightly. It's structurally simpler, but requires enormous stone masses to prevent collapse. The bent pyramid's chambers show that the architects were mastering this technique, preparing for the challenges they'd face at Giza. But Sneferu still wasn't satisfied. He'd learned painful lessons from Meidum and Dasha. The slope angle needed to be lower, the internal structure more robust, blocks placed in horizontal rows rather than sloped. Armed with this knowledge gained through costly failures, he ordered a third pyramid just north of the bent one. This is known as the Red Pyramid due to the reddish hue of the limestone used in its construction. Adopting a conservative 43-degree angle from base to apex, it rises to 105 meters without design changes, without collapses, without structural drama. It's the first truly successful smooth-sided pyramid, the perfect prototype that Khufu would use, and perfect 20 years later at Giza. The Red Pyramid's interior is accessible today, and descending its entrance passage is a memorable experience. The descending corridor sinks for 60 meters on a constant 27-degree slope. You have to crouch completely, almost crawl, as you descend into the pyramid's depths. The claustrophobia is intense, walls pressing from both sides, ceiling just inches above your back. You finally emerge into a chamber with a false vaulted ceiling rising 12 meters. Then another similar chamber. And finally a third chamber where the pharaoh's sarcophagus rested. These chambers are completely empty now, but the corbelled vaults are impressive examples of structural engineering. Each stone block is perfectly balanced, distributing its weight to the side walls, creating spaces that have withstood millions of tons for 46 centuries without cracking. Sneferu expended unimaginable resources on his 3 pyramids. Modern calculations estimate he used about 9 million tons of stone, nearly double what his son Khufu would use for the Great Pyramid. Why build 3 pyramids when other pharaohs built only 1? Theories abound. Some suggest each pyramid served a different religious purpose. One for the body, another for the ka, a third for the ba. Others propose he was simply obsessed with achieving architectural perfection, willing to abandon entire projects when they didn't meet his standards. What we know for sure is that the knowledge accumulated during Sneferu's reign made the Great Pyramid possible. Khufu inherited generations of large-scale construction experience, knowledge of which angles worked and which caused collapses, understanding of how to design internal chambers that wouldn't crush under weight. The Great Pyramid didn't arise spontaneously. It was the climax of 80 years of experimentation, failure, and painful learning. Now we must address the questions everyone asks. What isn't inside the pyramids? Let's debunk the popular myths that Hollywood and conspiracy theorists have perpetuated for decades. There are no treasures. This is the most disappointing but undeniable reality. The pyramids were looted millennia ago, probably during the first intermediate period between 2181 and 2055 BC, when central government collapsed and Egypt fragmented into rival kingdoms. During this chaos, royal tombs were systematically robbed by looters, needing to fund armies and local governments. Gold was melted down, jewels sold, valuable objects scattered so long ago that no trace remains. When 19th century modern explorers entered the pyramids, they found empty sarcophagi, stripped chambers, bare walls. Al-Mamun in 820 AD found the same. Even medieval Arabic texts mention the pyramids were already empty in their time. The looting happened so early in history that it probably occurred before Rome was founded, before the Iliad was written, in an antiquity so deep it's almost impossible to comprehend. There are no mummies. If the bodies of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkore ever rested in their granite sarcophagi, they were removed, stripped of wrappings for amulets, and probably destroyed or burned thousands of years ago. Successful royal mummy preservation only became common during the New Kingdom, when pharaohs abandoned pyramids for hidden Valley of the King's tombs. But even there, nearly all were looted. Only Tutankhamun's tomb survived relatively intact, and only because it was forgotten under other excavations' debris. There are no deadly traps. Hollywood has perpetuated images of pyramids filled with poisoned arrows, hidden pits, crushing blocks, and hermetically sealing doors trapping intruders. The reality is much more prosaic. The only defenses were granite blocks sealing passages and portcullises that could be lowered to block entrances. Once thieves overcame these with brute force, hammers and levers, nothing stopped them. The pyramids weren't designed as fortresses against intruders. They were religious machines, sacred structures whose protection relied on cultural reverence and fear of offending the gods, not physical defensive mechanisms. The idea of elaborate traps is pure cinematic fantasy with no historical basis. There are no chambers full of gold waiting to be discovered. Every inch of the pyramids has been explored, measured, scanned with modern technologies. We know exactly what spaces exist inside them. The Great Void discovered in 2017 via muon tomography is the only significant space remaining without direct access. But even if it contained something, it's more likely another structural relieving chamber than a secret room brimming with treasures. So if the pyramids don't contain treasures, mummies, or hidden secrets, what do they really have? The answer is something infinitely more valuable than gold. They contain direct evidence of humanity's capacity for innovation, massive-scale social organization, and perseverance through seemingly impossible challenges. This is where modern technology is revolutionizing our understanding. Tools that didn't exist just 20 years ago are revealing secrets hidden for millennia. We already mentioned muon tomography, but it's just the start. Three-dimensional laser scanning has allowed creating precise digital models of the pyramids with millimeter resolution. These models reveal that the Great Pyramid has a subtle concavity in its faces. Each face isn't perfectly flat, but slightly concave, dipping about half a meter inward at the center. This feature is practically invisible to the human eye, but mathematically precise, and detectable only with modern measuring instruments. Why create this concavity? No one knows for sure. Some engineers suggest it helps distribute weight, others that it has astronomical meaning related to how sunlight hits the faces during solstices. What's fascinating is that this feature demonstrates a level of design sophistication far beyond what we thought possible for 2500 BC technology. Drone photogrammetry has revealed precise alignments between Giza's pyramids and other ancient Egyptian sites. The three pyramids aren't placed randomly. They're aligned with diagonal precision, suggesting a master plan encompassing the whole complex. Some researchers propose the three pyramids' positions mirror Orion's belt stars as they appeared around 10,500 BC, though this theory is highly controversial and rejected by most Egyptologists. The Explorer robots we mentioned earlier continue revealing new details about the mysterious shafts. In 2011, the Djedi robot not only photographed the stone doors at the Queen's chamber shaft's ends, but also analyzed the red marks painted on the space between the two doors' walls. Using spectral analysis, they determined the red paint is natural ochre mixed with some organic binder, applied with brushes or fingers during construction. The marks seem to be symbols or numbers, possibly masons' indications on how to orient blocks. But their exact meaning remains undeciphered. They represent messages from 4,500 years ago, written by human hands in spaces never meant to be seen, preserved in absolute darkness until robotic cameras finally illuminated them in our century. Chemical analysis of the stones has revealed surprising information about construction techniques. Some researchers have proposed that outer blocks weren't quarried, but molded in place using a primitive geopolymer concrete, a mix of pulverized limestone, water, and natural binders poured into molds and hardened on-site. This theory is controversial and rejected by most geologists, who can clearly identify natural quarry marks on the blocks, but it illustrates how modern science continues questioning and re-evaluating ancient techniques. Ground-penetrating radar has identified anomalies under the sand around the pyramids, suggesting still unexcavated subterranean structures. These could be nobles' tombs, construction workshops, or buried ramps used during building. Each could contain crucial information about how the construction project was organized, how workers lived, what tools they used. But perhaps the greatest enigma that modern technology has helped clarify, though not completely solve, is the fundamental question: how the hell did they move and lift 2,300,000 stone blocks? The straight ramp theory is the oldest and most direct. They built ramps of earth and debris, gradually ascending to the pyramid's sides, allowing workers to drag blocks using wooden sleds, ropes, and human force. Modern experiments have shown that wetting sand in front of a sled dramatically reduces friction, making it possible for 50 men to drag a 2.5-ton block with relative ease. But the problem with straight ramps is scale. To reach the Great Pyramid's top at 146 meters, a ramp with a reasonable 10% slope would need to extend nearly 1.5 kilometers, requiring 3 times more material than the pyramid itself. There's no physical evidence of such massive ramps, though they could have been dismantled and removed after construction completed. The spiral ramp theory proposes the ramp wrapped around the pyramid, ascending in a spiral on the exterior. This would require less material, but create problems at corners where the ramp would need 90-degree turns. Plus, the ramp would block the pyramid's faces, making it impossible to check angles and alignments were correct until too late to fix errors. The internal ramp theory, proposed by French architect Jean-Pierre Houdon, suggests that after building the pyramid to a certain height with an external ramp, builders incorporated a spiral ramp inside the structure, just beneath the outer casing. Blocks were dragged up this internal ramp, pushed outward through temporary openings to place them in final position. This theory is elegant and would explain why we find no evidence of massive external ramps, but it would require incredibly sophisticated design and precise planning. The heaviest granite blocks for the king's chamber, some weighing 50 tons, would need special mechanisms. Houdon proposes the Grand Gallery functioned as a giant counterweight system, using heavy blocks descending one side to lift equally heavy blocks on the other. The physical evidence is tantalizing but not conclusive. There are anomalies detected by microgravimetry that could be internal ramps, but they could also be natural density variations in the stone. The only way to confirm would be drilling the pyramid, something Egyptian authorities rightly reject due to the risk of irreparable damage. More speculative theories include wooden crane-like machines, hydraulic systems using water channels to float blocks, and even pseudoscientific ideas about acoustic levitation or extraterrestrial technology. The latter can be completely dismissed. We have abundant evidence of the tools Egyptians used, the quarries they extracted blocks from, the worker settlements where they lived. The pyramids were built by humans using human technology, just applied with ingenuity, organization, and scale that our modern civilization rarely attempts to match. What truly sets the pyramids apart isn't so much the technology as the social organization. Coordinating 20,000 workers, feeding them, housing them, directing their efforts toward a unified goal over 20 years requires sophisticated bureaucracy, an economy capable of generating massive food surpluses, and a shared belief system motivating people to participate in a project that might not complete in their lifetime. Ancient Egypt had all these elements. Nile agriculture generated reliable food surpluses. The hieroglyphic writing system allowed keeping precise records of resources, workers, and materials. Religion provided transcendental motivation. Working on the pharaoh's tomb wasn't just employment, it was religious service guaranteeing divine blessings. And finally, we arrive at the central question this whole journey has been circling. What do the pyramids really contain? They don't contain gold. They hold no material treasures or earthly riches. All that was looted millennia ago melted down and dispersed until not a fragment remains. But the pyramids contain something infinitely more valuable, something no thief can steal and no time can erase. They contain tangible proof that humans are capable of the impossible. They contain evidence that a civilization without modern machinery, without computers, without electricity, could coordinate resources and labor on a scale rivaling our time's most ambitious engineering projects. They contain the demonstration that mathematical and astronomical precision doesn't require digital technology, that the human mind can grasp complex geometry and apply it monumentally using only careful observation and logical reasoning. They contain the testimony of a civilization that looked at death not with paralyzing fear, but with determination to conquer it, that responded to human mortality by building eternity in stone. They contain the expression of religious beliefs so profound they motivated investing decades of labor and unimaginable resources to build spiritual machines meant to launch souls to the stars. They contain lessons on persistence. Knowing Sneferu built 3 pyramids, seeing 2 fail before succeeding, teaches us that even the most ambitious projects require experimentation, failure, and continuous learning. They contain lessons on long-term planning. Projects taking 20 years to complete require vision transcending immediate gratification. And perhaps most importantly, the pyramids contain a direct challenge to our modern arrogance. We live in an era assuming progress is linear, that each generation is automatically more capable than the last, that ancient technology was primitive and limited. The pyramids shatter these assumptions. They force us to recognize that ancient civilizations possessed knowledge and capabilities we're only beginning to understand and in some ways still can't replicate. If we tried to build an exact replica of the Great Pyramid today, using only the tools and techniques available in 2500 BC, we'd fail. Not because we're less intelligent than ancient Egyptians, but because we've lost the specific knowledge they accumulated over generations. Their expertise in masonry, in moving great masses with human force, in coordinating massive labor, was as sophisticated as our knowledge of computing or aerospace engineering, just applied in completely different directions. The pyramids are time capsules containing knowledge crystallized in stone, waiting for us to finally develop the tools to read it fully. Every new discovery, every robotic exploration, every advanced technological scan reveals additional layers of sophistication we previously overlooked. And this is what makes the pyramids eternally fascinating. We never finish understanding them. Every answer we find generates new questions. Every mystery we solve reveals deeper enigmas. They're wells of complexity whose bottom we haven't reached after centuries of intensive study. So when you wonder what's inside the pyramids, the answer is this. They're almost empty, stripped of everything that once filled them with color and immediate cultural meaning. But simultaneously, they're absolutely brimming with history, knowledge, human ingenuity, and challenges to our understanding. They're empty and complete at the same time, architectural shells that nevertheless teem with mysteries, continuing to captivate human imagination 4.5 millennia after their construction.